Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH, and today we are looking at Lathril Blade of Elves. So this is going to be Elf Tribal in EDH. Now, it doesn't specifically have to be Lathril, and it doesn't specifically have to be both black and green, but I prefer black and green because black gives you access to the best tutors and some card draw spells that are relevant and a few other cards that are going to be relevant in black, but you could be a mono green Elf Tribal deck if you wanted to. So first of all, what does Lathril do? She's a 4 mana 2/3 with Menace, and she says whenever she deals combat damage to a player, you create that many 1/1 Elf Warriors, and tap 10 untapped elves you control. Each opponent loses 10 life, and you gain 10 life. So obviously that part's only going to be relevant when we're way ahead on the board. So we've got Craterhoof Behemoth and Azuri as the beatdown for when we have tons of elves in play already. We can potentially win by just getting one of these out and then overrunning our opponent. Eternal Witness is in here just as a way to recoup some stuff. We, of course, got a bunch of card draw, so we're going to be playing lots and lots of cheap elves, obviously. So cards like Toski and Beast Whisperer are relevant. We also have Glimpse of Nature as the spell version of Beast Whisperer. Bolus of Citadel, Guardian Project, whenever a non-token enters the battlefield, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature or creature card in your graveyard, draw a card. We're in EDH, so obviously all of our cards are one-offs. We've got Pact of the Serpent. You choose a creature type, target player draws X and loses X, where X is the number of creatures of that type. Skull Clamp, obviously. And then Null Profusion and Recycle, which do exactly the same thing. You skip your draw. You have a max hand size of 2 cards, but whenever you play a card, so play a land or cast a spell, you draw a card. So they're basically essentially 6 mana enchantment versions of Glimpse of Nature. We got all of our combo pieces, which we'll come back to later. We've got all of our elves. Again, we'll come back to that later. We've got a bit of fast mana. We've got haste. Haste is actually relevant in this deck. So Concordant Crossroads straight up just gives everything haste. Lightning Greaves also gives all of our mana dorks haste because we can move it around. And it protects Lathril, although it's not strictly necessary to protect Lathril, although it is necessary to protect certain combo cards. And then Thousand Year Elixir and Tyvar are not strictly speaking haste, but they are allowing us to activate our abilities as though the creature had haste. So they're basically haste because for the most part, we care more about activating abilities rather than attacking straight up. We've got all of our lands with some standouts being Gaia's Cradle, which is going to be highly relevant to what we're doing. Also Nykthos, because hey, we're going to play a bunch of green permanents anyway. Wirewood Lodge also untaps elves, so that can sometimes be relevant. And Yavimaya is also going to be relevant for reasons we'll get to later. We've got Protection, because we want to make sure that we're not getting disrupted. So we've got Allosaur Shepherd and Cavern of Souls to make sure that we don't get countered. We also have Eladamri and Steely Resolve. So what do these do? 2 mana, 2/2 elf. All elves gain Forest Walk. Elves can't be the target of spells or abilities. So all your elves have Shroud, and Steely Resolve is you choose a creature type, and creatures of the chosen type have Shroud. So they're not going to get hit by removal. Lightning Greaves, Veil of Summer, and Azuri is technically protection because it can regenerate an elf. Then we've got all of our ramp. So it's going to be every single ramp elf that you would normally play. So, of course, Elvish Mystic, Llanowar Elves, Elves of Deep Shadow, Boreal Druid, Arbor Elf, but we also get additional ramp cards in Bloom Tender, which produces a mana of each color among permanents we control. So it's always at least a green, and then if we have a black permanent, it's going to produce a black as well. We've got Birchlore Rangers, which taps 2 untapped elves to produce a mana of any color, and Heritage Druid, which taps 3 untapped elves to produce triple green. We've got Priest of Titania, which taps for a green for each elf we control. We also have Elvish Archdruid, which similarly taps a green for each elf we control. We also have Elvish Guidance, which is an aura that goes on a land, and it says whenever we tap the enchanted land for mana, we add green for each elf we control. Fyndhorn Elves, Emerald Medallion to make green spells cheaper. Wirewood Channeler is another tap X, where X is the number of elves we control. It's worse than Priest and Archdruid because it's 4 mana, but it is just another version of that same effect. And then Llanowar Loam Speaker, which either taps for a mana of any color, or it taps to make a land into a 3/3 creature. That is going to be relevant for combos that we'll get to later. Tyvar is technically reanimation. We've got some removal in Beseiju and Reclamation Sage. A little bit of stacks in Collector Oof and Opposition Agent. Again, most of our ramp isn't artifact-based. The only ones we have are Chrome Mox, Soul Ring, Mox Diamond, and Monocrypt. Every other one is creatures. Oh, and I forgot to mention Circle of Dreams Druid. Tap green for each creature you control. So that's essentially the same thing as Priest and Elvish Archdruid. Also, Leyline of Abundance is going to be relevant for combos. All mana tapping creatures add another green. And then a whole boatload of tutors. So GSC, Eldritch Evolution, Survival of the Fittest, the Black Tutors, of course, Natural Order, Crop Rotation, mostly to go get Gaia's Cradle. Skyshroud Poacher is not an elf itself, but it's 3 tap, search your library for an elf and put it directly onto the battlefield. So then we've got all of our elves, which I've mostly been through already, but some other ones to note are Lizalana Huntmaster. Whenever you cast an elf, you make a 1/1 elf. Nettle Sentinel, whenever you cast a green spell, untap it. Quirion Ranger, bounce a forest, untap a creature, activate only once per turn. Rex Sage, destroy an artifact or enchantment. Devoted Druid, Deathrite Shaman. Basically, that's what we got going on here. So, anybody familiar with elves in either Modern or Pauper or Legacy is going to be familiar with a lot of the combo lines going on here. But basically, this is the combo pieces. So, oh boy, there's a lot. So first of all, we've got ways of producing infinite mana. So if we have a creature that produces more mana than it costs to untap it, we can produce infinite mana. So how do we do that? Well, we do have cards like Circle of Dreams Druid, Priest of Titania, Wirewood Channeler, and Elvish Archdruid. These are all cards that can produce potentially tons of mana. So we have Umbral Mantle, which untaps them for 3 mana. This allows us to produce infinite mana as long as we are producing at least 4 mana per tap, which in an all-elf tribal deck should be fairly simple to do. Similarly, Staff of Domination will untap a creature for 3 mana and will untap itself for 1 mana. So if we have an elf that produces 5 mana, we generate infinite mana. And we've got Cloudstone Curio, which can be used to have one elf enter, bounce another elf, play an elf, bounce another elf. So if we've got an elf that can produce, again, tons of mana, we can potentially bounce them back and forth. So if we have, for example, a way of granting haste, such as Lightning Greaves or Concordant Crossroads or Tyvar or Thousand Year Elixir, we can, let's say, have a Priest of Titania, we tap it for mana, we play another elf, we bounce the priest back to our hand, then we play the priest again, bounce the other elf back to our hand, and then immediately tap the priest to generate more mana. We also have all of these untap effect dudes. So Wirewood Symbiote is return an elf you control to its owner's hand, untap target creature, but you can only activate it once per turn. Well, if we've got any creatures, we can have, let's say, a Wirewood Symbiote, and then let's say we have a Priest of Titania, we untap the Priest of Titania, making, that makes some amount of mana by bouncing an elf back to our hand. Then we play the elf that we just bounced and trigger Cloudstone Curio, which bounces the Wirewood Symbiote back to our hand. We then replay the Wirewood Symbiote. Now this is a new Wirewood Symbiote, and we can activate it again. Boom, we generate infinite mana. Ashaya turns all of our creatures into forests, meaning that we can do the same Wirewood bounce shenanigans, but with Scrib Ranger and Quirion Ranger, which are cards that require us to bounce forests to our hand to untap a creature. Well, now all of our creatures are forests thanks to Ashaya, so we can do the same things. And there's lots of combinations that we can do with that. So we can do it with Cloudstone Curio. If we've got any combination of Wirewood, Quirion Ranger, and Scrib Ranger, if we have any 2 of those creatures and an Ashaya, we can bounce both of them over and over and over to keep untapping, again, let's say a Priest of Titania. We also have other combos. So let's say we have Devoted Druid. If we have a way, so let's say we have Leyline of Abundance in play along with Devoted Druid, right? So every time we tap Devoted Druid, we generate double green. If we then have Azuri, this means that Azuri can give +3 to our elves every time we activate it. So if we have Devoted Druid plus Leyline, we tap it. So we have to activate Azuri at least once. So let's say we activate Azuri, Devoted Druid is now a 3/5. We activate Make Double Green, we untap it, putting a -1 counter on it. So it is now 4 toughness. We activate it again, making double green. We untap it again, it's now 3 toughness. We activate it again, making double green. We now have 6 green mana in our pool, and we can activate Azuri again. So every time we activate Azuri and do the activations of Devoted Druid 3 times, we are generating an additional green mana every single time. So this allows us to generate infinite green mana, and then we can just infinitely overrun the field with Azuri and win the game. Similarly, over here, we've got Lathril. So if we can make it so that we have 10 elves plus Lathril, and we have infinite mana, we can move Umbral Mantle around to all of our creatures and untap every single one of them, and then just use the Lathril tap ability to drain our opponents out again. Then we just move Umbral Mantle around again, untapping all of our creatures, activate Lathril again, and then our opponents get drained out. And this applies if we have any other infinite mana in any other way, such as Staff of Domination. If we have infinite mana, Staff of Domination plus Lathril, we just untap all of our creatures, activate Lathril, deal 10, untap all of our creatures, activate Lathril, deal 10, etc. Or we can just draw our entire deck with Staff of Domination. Same deal with Cloudstone Curio. If we are generating more mana than it takes to constantly bounce and replay things, we can just play Lathril, tap all of our guys, dealing 11 damage. We can even do that with Cloudstone Curio's trigger on the stack. So let's say we have infinite mana, we've got 10 elves, we cast Lathril, we have an ability on the stack, let's say, or we have a haste from something. Lathril enters, Cloudstone Curio trigger, activate Lathril, tap everything down, deal 10. Cloudstone Curio trigger resolves, bounce an elf back to our hand, replay the elf. It triggers, bounce another elf back to our hand, replay the elf, trigger, bounce another elf back to our hand. We bounce and replay every single creature that we have in play. We replay Lathril, again, as long as we have the mana to keep casting everything and something that grants haste, we then get to just tap Lathril again, drain our opponent out. Similarly, if we're doing any sort of Cloudstone or Wirewood or Quirion Ranger or Scrib Ranger loop that involves us bouncing creatures back to our hand, even if we don't have infinite mana yet, we can use that to keep triggering Beast Whisperer, to keep triggering Glimpse of Nature, to keep triggering Guardian Project, to keep triggering Null Perfusion or Recycle, to continuously draw more cards in order to get us into that combo or just get tons of mana value. Leyline of Abundance itself is also an infinite mana outlet, so if we have infinite mana along with Leyline of Abundance, we can then just activate Leyline's third ability down here, put in infinite counters on our creatures, and then as long as we can haste them, or as long as just some of them are untapped and can be attacked, and we can attack with those creatures, then that just allows us to put infinite counters on our guys and attack our opponents to death. Similarly, even if we don't have infinite creatures, as long as we have enough of them, we can just overrun with Azuri, even if we don't have infinite mana. Overrun with Craterhoof. We can natural order Craterhoof into play. There's ways of winning even when we don't have infinite mana. We also can add Eternal Witness to the Cloudstone loop or the Quirion Ranger, Scrib Ranger loop when we've got Ashaya in play to bounce the Eternal Witness back to our hand and replay it in order to get spells back from our graveyard. So let's say we've got spells that are temporary one-offs like Glimpse of Nature, for example, we can get Eternal Witness back. So let's say we Glimpse of Nature and we've got Eternal Witness plus Quirion plus Ashaya. Now Eternal Witness is a forest, so we can play the Eternal Witness, get Glimpse of Nature back, draw a card, play Eternal Witness, Glimpse of Nature, draw a card over and over, keep drawing. Similarly, we can Glimpse of Nature, and then let's say we've got a form of haste, and we've got Quirion Ranger and Ashaya, right? So Quirion Ranger returns a forest, so if it itself is a forest from Ashaya, it can bounce itself. It can also make infinite mana that way. So we've got Quirion Ranger, Ashaya, and something that grants haste. Doesn't matter what it is, right? So we go, Ashaya is a forest, so we tap Ashaya, we generate a mana. We tap Quirion Ranger, we generate a mana. Then we activate Quirion Ranger, bouncing itself, untapping Ashaya. Then we replay Quirion Ranger, we've got 1 mana floating. Ashaya is untapped. We can keep repeating that over and over to generate infinite mana. Again, if we've got a card like Beast Whisperer, Guardian Project, Recycle, Null Perfusion, Glimpse of Nature, bouncing a card in this way also draws our entire deck. Similarly, we can also overrun our opponents using Allosaurus Shepherd. So Allosaurus Shepherd can make all of our elves into 5/5s, which can be an Azuri-like effect that just allows us to kill our opponents. We also have Nettle Sentinel, which itself will untap whenever we cast a green spell. So if it is a forest as a result of Ashaya, we can tap it for green, and then whenever we cast anything, we can tap it for green. So this can also be part of combo loops. We can also use Birchlore Rangers or Heritage Druid as ways of generating mana and then untapping things. So we have Nettle Sentinel, of course, that just untaps when we cast stuff, but we can just tap anything else that we're playing. So if we've got Cloudstone Curio, Ashaya plus bounce stuff, we can use Heritage Druid or Birchlore Rangers to make mana out of that, even if the creatures don't have haste, because we can just tap them immediately using these creatures. We also have Lizalana Huntmaster to generate Elf Warrior tokens whenever we cast elves, which can add to the mana that we're generating via Birchlore or Heritage Druid, or just combo with Cloudstone Curio to bounce things. It also adds to the elf counts for all of our cards like Wirewood Channeler and Priest of Titania and all of those effects. If our opponents have a bunch of artifacts and enchantments, we can use Rex Sage in our bounce loops to bounce and replay this over and over to kill all of our opponents' artifacts and enchantments. Oh, and there's so much more. So, obviously, we've got Gaia's Cradle as one of our lands. We also have Dryad Arbor as one of our lands. So Dryad Arbor is a forest creature. So there are ways of... We can use this basically as a way to bounce and replay things. It's a creature that can be bounced via Quirion Ranger or untapped via Quirion Ranger. Nykthos similarly. So Nykthos and Gaia's Cradle are both lands that can produce tons and tons of mana. Obviously, depending on how many creatures / green permanents we have on the field that are giving green devotion. So if we turn these into forests using Yavimaya, we can bounce them back to our hand using Scrib Ranger or Quirion Ranger and then replay them to generate even more mana. Additionally, Llanowar Loam Speaker can turn one of our lands into a creature. So We can use Llanowar Loam Speaker to turn Gaia's Cradle or Nykthos into a creature, and then use that as the Priest of Titania Elvish Archdruid type creature that's producing a ton of colors, or a ton of mana rather, and then use that in the combos that involve untapping things or bouncing them and replaying them over and over. Although with lands it's more difficult because you can't Cloudstone Curio loop stuff because you can only play one land a turn. There are potentials where we could play stuff like Elvish Pioneer or a Boreal Grazer as creatures that enter and put stuff back in, and put a land back into play that we could combo with Gaia's Cradle and Nykthos, although we don't have to. Similarly, Wirewood Lodge, if we can turn that into a creature, we can use it to untap another creature, but then we're just untapping this, so it doesn't really chain off the same way as everything else. Dread Arbor is, of course, fetchable off GSC to be another turn 1 ramp source. Anyways, there's just an absolutely gargantuan amount of ways of going infinite or just producing tons of value. Like Tyvar untapping something isn't necessarily infinite, but it can just produce a ton of mana via the Tyvar untap, 1000 Year Elixir untapping. All of our combos are always going to involve either a loop that involves untapping something, bouncing something back to our hand and replaying it, and or giving everything haste / pseudo haste via the effects like 1000 Year Elixir that allow us to tap our mana dorks. And then we've got a bunch of infinite mana outlets or infinite bounce outlets, which includes Azuri and Craterhoof, and of course anything that can tutor for creatures, which is a lot of our tutors. Leyline of Abundance, Staff are also infinite mana outlets, as is Umbral Mantle, sort of, and Lathril can also be an infinite outlet from the command zone. It's not quite an infinite outlet, but it's an infinite outlet in terms of any combo that involves untapping things or bouncing things, because then we can just activate Lathril over and over. So every game is pretty much going to involve playing as much ramp as fast as possible, so all of these various ramp cards, and then eventually assembling one of those combos. Doesn't really matter which one, pretty much all of them will kill our opponent. And yeah, that is going to be Lathril Elvish Tribal.